My father was Joseph Graff. However, when he came to this country, his name was Joseph Graff, Grakope. But with the immigration at Ellis Island, they changed his name. And they gave him options, but he found his name actually on the corner of Polk and Paulina in Chicago. And it said Albert Graff. Now, being 11 years old from a village, he said anybody who was important enough to build the sidewalks of Chicago, I'm going to take that name. So my father became Joseph Albert Graff. That's how my name came across. My mom was born here in Chicago in the back of a tailor store, which my grandfather, Harry Bloom, owned. And she was born there. She was educated in the Chicago schools, and she did well. My father could not afford a formal education. He worked very hard. Initially, like a lot of the immigrants, he worked in a factory, and he had to eke out a living to support his mother and his sister. And it was very difficult. He then became a boxer because, as he put it, if you worked in the factory all week, you made less than $5. If you were a boxer, you could make $5 in a one round. So he did that for a long time until somebody said to him, "Joe Graff, you're going to get your brains knocked out." And he became a furrier. Somebody said, "Do you want to learn how to make fur coats and sword skins and all that?" And he said, "Sure, I don't have to get my brains knocked out." He did have a dancing school. There was more money in dancing than boxing. So he did that too. He was a very interesting person, an exciting person. My mom loved to dance, and she and my father had a great time together. They were married 25 years when my father died of cancer. But he loved my mother, and we as kids could see that. And if you ask my sister Barbara Dorfman, she would give you the same response. Family is close. I cannot imagine life without my sister. My grandparents on my father's side, I never knew. His father died in Russia when he was 5 years old, so that would have been 1905. His mother died here in the 30s, so I never had an opportunity to know her. I know that she was a very religious woman, and I guess that was the big thing, is that when my dad gave her money, she gave it to charity. She didn't want it for herself. My mother's parents, who came from Russia in 1903 and 1904, Harry Bloom and Molly Bloom, came here, and they were the ultimate success. My grandfather was a tailor. He ended up owning 3 custom men's stores with my grandma helping him. My mom was born in the back of one of the stores in 1912. So my history in America is very typical of the immigrants of that era. We weren't unusual, we were very typical, and I'm proud of that. My grandfather did unusual things. He went back. He made a lot of money prior to the Depression. So he went back to the village he came from. He brought 48 people at his expense, which to me is remarkable by any standards. This was in Russia, Poland, right on the border. It was about 75 kilometers from Białystok. And there's nothing left. We went to the museum in Washington. The Nazis killed every single living person and then destroyed every church and synagogue. I think my grandfather's trip and brought all the people was about 1918 or 1920. He had to guarantee jobs and housing and everything. That the government had a whole list. My grandfather said, everybody will have food, everybody will have a job. He was a pretty cool guy. And he was very handsome, and he used to dress to the nines, and he loved to do that. Of his passport and all the papers, Joey has the original, and it's framed. He's got it in his living room. But for a man to go back, who came from a small village, and bring 48 people, I'm so proud of him. My father died in 1958. I joined Demolay in 1959 at my mother's urging. It proceeded to change my life on a daily basis. It delivered for me a good life with high expectations that we had to meet. I am extremely proud of being a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. It has added a great amount of prestige. I am the first honorary past Grandmaster in Illinois, but I've just spent 12 years as Grand Chancellor. So my involvement isn't a lapel pin. Demolay taught me that you must be physically involved and emotionally involved if you in fact want to grow and add to your society. And why I see the importance of bringing this to Europe and the world. And there's a great need. We have the opportunity to change the future. It's a community thing. And that's what we need in a modern world. The tool that'll help us grow a great Freemasonry. So we have the tools. We just have to use them and aspire to higher things. My life will be limited just by years, but my work can go on indefinitely. But we have to work on the future, and Demolay is the future for boys. They're the ones that'll lead Freemasonry. They'll lead governments. They'll lead humanity. I grew up in Skokie, Illinois, and it's a suburb of Chicago. And I went to high school there, as did my sister Barbara, and we had a great experience, and that's where I joined Demolay. And it just walked hand in hand. But another experience that came out of Demolay / Freemasonry is I was visiting a friend who was sick in Mount Sinai Hospital in Chicago. And I saw this cute nurse. So having no willpower, I of course went and made a pass at her. and I failed. She wouldn't even give me her name. So my ego was lying on the floor bleeding. It came back the second night because I wasn't going to give up. The second night, she gave me her name. There was no phone number. The third night, she saw I was wearing my dad's Masonic ring. Asked me if I was a Mason. I said yes, and she said her dad was past master of 2 lodges in the Philippines. So we now had a common connection, and I took her to lunch, but I didn't know the Filipino custom of a chaperone. By the time I fed the 2 girls, I was broke. If I didn't borrow money from my mom, I was in big trouble. My wife is from the Philippines, and when I wanted to marry her, I wasn't able to because the law required she return to the Philippines for 2 years. If I had married her, it would have been easy, but I was terrified of getting married. And the result being that I waited. We waited about 1.5 years. We got married in Windsor, Ontario, and we've had this very good life together. And it's been an interesting life. We have traveled to Asia, to Europe. We've traveled everywhere, but we didn't travel as tourists. We traveled as people with a great interest in society. And the great interest came from demolay and Freemasonry. We've never been on a trip that we were the average tourist. We're married almost 50 years. And to stay married 50 years in a modern society is almost impossible. And we have a son and a daughter. Our son is a graduate of DePaul University, but he also lived in Europe and taught for 2 years in Vienna and did his master's at Leuven in Belgium. My daughter did both her undergrad and grad here in Chicago and teaches children. I have 2 granddaughters. I have the oldest, Mia Grace, and I smile because she's the oldest, so I've had time with her. And now there's a baby. My second granddaughter's name is Riley. My daughter lives in Skokie. My son lives with his partner in the South Loop, and everybody seems to be happy. I have one additional story that's very dear to my heart. My father, on a boat, carried a Russian samovar in 1911 for God knows how long, probably weeks, I'm guessing. But he carried it. And the reason he carried it is it was his grandfather's. And his grandfather was a rabbi. So the big thing was to bring the samovar here. It's from about circa 1860. And it means everything in the world to me because it's my ancestors. And I believe in my ancestors. I don't know who Rabbi Joseph was, other than he was a rabbi, and he was my father's grandfather. And Joey's named for him. Joey, I'm very proud of you. I believe that you and Steve have a great life together. And I'm proud of the work you do and how you approach it. I want to thank you for being so good to Mom and I. We need it. And thank you. Michelle, I wish you everything. Everything that you and your husband want, and obviously the two girls. So whatever differences we had, please put them aside. We can't do this for eternity. I'm grateful that I had good parents. I have a great sister, and I have a good marriage. So I was very lucky. It's mind-boggling.